Ask Greg, who always does a great job with this, to facilitate a discussion for us. And I'll try to let you guys do most of the talking and I'll do most of the listening. But anyway, I got three questions there. I don't know if you want to start there, Greg, but the show is yours.
Well, don't turn your mic off, Rod. Wow. I don't know how many of the rest of you guys have kind of been holding your breath a little bit at times today, and maybe taking a big exhale right now, like me. I don't know. Here's what I do know. I know a lot of you guys on this line, on this call today, but I don't know everybody. And I certainly don't know everybody's story. We've talked about a story so much recently. And, we may have some men on this line that you're not a father. You don't have children of your own, but you are sons. And I've got some questions, but I think my first one is just to kind of hear a takeaway from what you've heard today. What is something that Rod mentioned, or maybe he didn't mention, maybe he alluded to something and the Lord took you somewhere further, deeper, somewhere else. But it might be something that someone else needs to hear as well. What's a takeaway from what you've heard just this morning before I maybe ask some more pointed, specific questions?
Hey guys, I just observe in my walk, as my daughter grew up, it wasn't hard for me to hug her and tell her I love her, even through the teenage years when she's driving me nuts. But just in my relationship with my dad, with my son, I really came to a place where I kind of had to draw a line in the sand, so to speak, and go hug my son and tell him I love him. That's not something that my dad did with me. My dad was a great man, but he was more of the strong, silent type. So it's easy for me to go that direction. And like I say, especially for my son, just once in a while, just pull him aside and just give him a big hug, tell him I love him. You're my son, and I want the best for you. But I have to make a decision to do that. That doesn't flow naturally from me.
I had a couple of things. One that sticks out a lot is the plan involves you loving your spouse and modeling your love for her in front of kids. I've apologized to both my kids that I didn't do much of that, and that came from the way I grew up. I never saw my dad, be affectionate towards my mom in front of any of us 5 kids. So that was just he probably got that from his dad. His dad came from Sweden. I don't know, but. And like my mom said, we're not a hugging family. We don't hug, we're all comfortable. If somebody walks up in church and tries to hug us or something, that really bugs us too. But the other thing I was going to mention was this reminded me of an emotional time. I was going to college at the time, and I was helping my dad work in a furniture store he had, and really stressed out one day and just said, I yelled at him. I said, you've never said you were proud of me, never once, and he looked at me in total disbelief, and he says, what are you talking about? He says, I tell everybody, I brag on you to everybody I meet, and I'm always talking about you everywhere. And I was totally in shock then, because I'd never heard it. I mean, he never did it in front of me. He'd always went off, and if he was doing this, I never knew it, So, I mean, that's the only tip I'll pass on is make sure your kid sees it if you brag on them all the time. Because boy, you can just live in a vacuum for your whole life and never even know that's going on. But it really helped me in a way to hear that. It was a real emotional outbreak between me and him. I could tell he was mad that I'd even think that. And anyway, that's just passing that on.
Hey, Carl, I can really identify with that because I heard my dad say that to other people, but I didn't hear it to me. So I understand fully what you're talking about. Other people might have known it, but I didn't know it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Rod had brought out, the word forgiveness and release. And that's such a powerful, powerful message to forgive what has occurred in the past and release your dad from any of those mistakes that they've made because if you don't, it's going to carry on. And I really feel like the curse stops with us.
Yeah.
Once we gave our life over to Christ, that curse began to dissipate.
Yeah.
As long as we follow the principles of forgiveness and release and let go of those things. So many times we hear of, oh, I'm a victim because of this. And it's blame shifting. It's important that we understand that we can have those wounds, but it's still, I'm not a victim anymore. I'm not a victim of my past or my family's past or historical past of any curses that my family may have brought into my family. I'm not a victim anymore. My grandfather, I grew up with my grandfather living with us, and he was a very sour, angry man. Just, we had, as a teenager, I had encounters with him. But that curse, that anger stopped when I said, Jesus, come into my life. But I had to forgive, and I had to release all those situations that I remember as a kid with my grandfather and my dad as well. So I think that's kind of my takeaway. I have 18 grandchildren now. I have 6 kids. And it's so important that for me as the patriarch of my family to carry the blessing into that generation. And so that's kind of my takeaway. Forgive, release, the curse stops with us.
Good.
Jay, man, way to break the chain, brother. Praise the Lord.
Amen.
Hey, Scott, looks like you're ready to say something.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, Rod. Thank you for this message. I know you've spoken on fatherhood in the past. Personally, I think back when I had our first 2 boys, and the blessing of having them at the time I was part of TGIW. I mean, they're one's almost 18, the other one's almost 21, and to see how they've because I've been intentional with these a lot of the things you've said today, even back then, to see how they've grown in their walk, and being very intentional about making sure I expressed to them I love them. And again, part of similar to what you guys have talked about, I never heard my dad say that those words. I know he was around. He was definitely much a great role model as far as work ethic and responsibility. Those things which are real important. But the words "I love you," I never did hear. But as I started to implement that with my boys, my dad saw that, and so it's been a blessing to see the last probably 10 years of him now coming back around and saying "I love you" to me. So when I was intentional about starting with this with my boys, my dad was watching that, so that was really a blessing from that. And then I know a lot of you know my story. My first wife passed away. Be 7 years ago, and he brought into my life another incredible lady and 2 girls. So starting a blended family 5 years ago, it's been being intentional with daughters now. They're in their 20s, and just hearing their story, and how can I apply principles you talk about here today, Rod, with them to make sure that I'm a blessing in their lives. And it very much being intentional. Lori and I have talked about how she's been intentional with the boys, more so early on, and myself with the girls. So it's taking these principles now and applying it to how can I apply these to not only to my new daughters, but also new son-in-laws. Right. And now we have a granddaughter of almost 10 months. So taking that next step to the next generation. But it comes back to what am I personally doing every single day to honor God, to stay in that personal growth, spiritual growth pattern, modeling to our kids, in front of them, how Lori and I affectionately show love to each other, express that to each other. Laura and I just finished a 31-day pursuit challenge, a marriage book for that each of us went through. So continue to work on our marriage so our kids see that. Back to the daughters are both married. They're 3 years and almost 2 years into their marriage. So like you said, Rod, here, we're always going to be parents to our kids no matter what age. So we have to continue to set that example. So there's just so many things that your message today I've been blessed by, because for one, my first part of my story, as a dad to my two boys, the blessing of being around men like you guys on the call today, learning from you guys, seeing how those principles are lived out, and then applying those. 2 weeks ago, Rod, the Father's Day message was fantastic, and both my boys were a part of that. And I know that one of the things that Phil had asked or challenged the men to do was ask your kids, what's the first thing that comes to your mind, about my life? What's the most important thing that you see in me? And, obviously the hope is that they see that Christ is first in my life. And so I was able to have that conversation with Joshua, my youngest one. And so that was a blessing. So for me, it's continue to stay in prayer for our kids, continue to model to them, God's love for me, to pass that on, to verbalize, be intentional every day about verbalizing I love you to them, and just listening to them, and just when God leads with Lori and I continue to provide some practical guidance, taking scripture and applying it to the everyday situation, so they understand God's, how do you take his truths and truly apply it to that situation? I think connecting the two so they see God's promises coming to fruition in their life. So lots of stuff, Rod. Thank you for your message. And it's just been a blessing to be a part of this ministry for all these years now. It's impacted my life.
Thank you,
Rod,
Scott.
I thank you for the message too, because it started out, my old man, when I think about my dad, he was hard, he was tough, never loving, never affectionate, always pointing out what you did wrong. So I became a little soldier because of that. And my oldest son, when it came to him, I started teaching him those same kind of principles. My second son came along and he taught me, number one, boys see more than they hear. And what I mean by that is I tongue kissed my wife one time, and this boy, less than 2 years old, tried to tongue kiss his mama. And I said, hey, you can't do that. That's my woman, And then I think I fussed at my wife one time and I was shaking my finger at her. Less than a day later, he was standing in the hallway, shaking his finger, couldn't hardly talk, but he was fussing at his mother. And as women normally do, they give you those looks that if looks could kill you, you're a dead man. I knew then that would never happen again.
Yeah.
And from that lesson, I changed the type of dad I was. That son also liked hugging. He always made me hug him. In the beginning, it was weird. I didn't like it. It was uncomfortable. But now when I see that boy as a 38-year-old man, I love those hugs. And he's taught us to become a hugging family. So now when we greet, we hug. And I just thank God, that child changed me. At the same time, I was trying to find my way to Christ. I wasn't doing a good job of it, but he taught me to find my way to Christ. He taught me how to get saved and filled with the Holy Spirit. So that was, I look back at that and I was like, wow, he made a baby teach me, how to be a man. And now if you look at my sons, and I've got 3 grandkids by that second son, 2 by the first son, and those 3 grandkids, the way he hugs them and loves them and teaches them, I mean, it almost brings tears to my eyes when I watch it. And thank you, Rod, because
Uh,
this
Lawrence, what a great story. Thank you for sharing that. That's so cool. Wow. Little kids will teach us, won't they? If we're open to it, God uses even our kids to teach us.
exactly.
Jerry, your mic's off. Did you want to say something there, buddy?
Uh, just to reiterate, am I on?
Yes, go.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, it's a simple story about kids watching you. For years, I've been involved with BSF, and back in Wichita, this was back in the 70s, and our kids were young. Anyway, part of the BSF program is if you're a leader, a discussion leader, you're to connect with your guys. You got 15 guys or so, and you to actually call them on the phone and connect with them and rap with them. And that usually occurred on Sunday night, which preceded a Monday meeting. Anyway, I think he was 6, 7 years old, and he was at school. And the teacher, good teachers back then, well, what do you want to do when you grow up, or what are you going to be doing when you grow up? And my son, he said, well, I guess I'll be calling my men. I mean, he projected out to what he saw me doing in a Christian setting. And he really didn't understand it, but he said, well, I guess I'll be calling my men. And that's there's two sides to that story. Maybe I spent too much time doing that, or he thought I did. But anyway, it lasted. They've seen me serve, and they know your art to serve. So it is important. It's just critical. Doing more than saying sometimes is pretty impactful.
I love it. Love that story. Byron, you're unmuted. I know you got something to say, but
Oh, I really appreciate this. As some of you know, my dad died 6 months before I was born, so I never really got to know him. There were other men in my life, good influences, bad influences. But one of the things that really struck me, and I was thinking about it before I think Scott said anything about it, but I have an opportunity now to help my son-in-law get some points about how to be a good father that I missed. And also, a couple of you might know that I've talked about my son Caleb and asked for prayer for him. He's doing much better now. But for so long, I had instincts to protect his son from him because of the way Caleb was living. And I was kind of a buffer between the two because I didn't want Jaden to experience his dad doing all the crazy stuff that he did. And now I'm in a transition period where I have to learn how to help Caleb be the dad that Jaden needs. I don't know if you can grasp that, but for me, for a long time, it was like this with Jaden being between him and Caleb. And now I have to reprogram my thoughts about my relationship with each of them so that I'm the one who's helping Caleb pull the cart up the hill with Jaden in it. So today was a good refresher for me on what my direction should be, and to start thinking about serious ways and putting together a plan to do things maybe with the both of them, and to encourage them about things they can do together that will break that curse before it hits Jaden. So this was a good eye opener for me. I thank you for it, and I thank God for allowing me to hear it.
Thank you, Byron. Appreciate that. Hey, let me just let me ask this and see if anybody would be willing to talk about it. The good, the bad, or the ugly. But this is probably not the first time you've heard about a father's blessing. But I'm just curious. Anybody here willing to share have you been blessed by your dad? Um, and how impactful really was that? Rod talked about it. I'd love to hear from someone maybe who you've had that experience with your dad, or maybe what Rod is talking about as well. Maybe you have blessed your children, and just love to hear and allow the rest of the guys just to kind of eavesdrop in on how did that go and how impactful was that with your kids. And maybe Byron just kind of touched on it just there. Maybe how is that working itself out even now? So, man, somebody encourage us with a story like that today, if you would.
And before someone jumps in, I'm really glad you asked that question, Greg. Thank you. And yeah, I'm all ears. I'd love to hear what that looks like. Either you've given the blessing or you've received the blessing. What's that look like?
That was an issue for me most of my life. And I think it was Carl that said it earlier that talked about his dad would tell everybody else, but never told me or told us. And after my father had passed, my mother had been gone, and then my stepmother asked me to do his funeral. And I was like, why would I do that? And she said, because he always said that's who he wanted to preach his funeral. And my dad and I didn't get along a lot. You know, we were just too much alike. My two brothers and my dad got along much better than I ever got along with him. And it was amazing that she would tell me that. And I said, well, she said, you just don't know. Your dad told everybody. He worshiped the ground you walked on. And I was like, really? But he never told me. She said he didn't. He said, believe me, I heard it every day. And that changed everything for me. And it made me realize that I had to affirm my sons. And so from that point, made sure I affirmed them in many of the things they did.
Amen.
Man, thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you. Jim Martin, were you trying to get in on that discussion? Or did you just
I don't know, can you hear me?
Pretty rough, Jim. Yeah. I think he's trying, but I think that car noise is a little too intense.
All right. Somebody else. Anyone?
Hey, Jay, you kind of alluded, have you done it? Have you done it with those 6 kids and 18 grandkids? Have you done that? If not, are you?
Well, I'd like to say that I'm perfect at what the plan is, but I'm not. But let me say this about my dad. I had a very tumultuous teenage experience and just brought havoc into the family. And I was a fighter and got arrested and just all kinds of different things back in my teens. My dad was disappointed in me. At age 19, I gave my life over to Christ, and I saw our relationship change immediately. I felt his pride. He never told me that, but I felt it because our relationship, our communication changed completely. And so I knew that he was proud of me. I wish I would have heard it. But as far as my kids, I went through a period where I had to apologize to my daughters because I was more of a dad for young men, you know, playing sports and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of left my daughters out of that model. And so I had to apologize for my brashness and the way I would coach kids. And I just didn't do my daughters correctly. But so we had a session of apologizing to them, and all that is good. as far as blessing my kids, they know, they hear from me. I speak into their life, and each one of them knows and have heard from me versus what I received from my dad, just knowing it but never hearing it.
Yeah.
They know it and they hear it from me.
Yeah.
As far as my 18 grandchildren, and I also have a granddaughter-in-law who lived with us before they got married. They hear from us. I watched her do her Bible study every morning before she married my grandson. She was doing an internship at Hallmark. And I said to her, Michaela, I am so blessed that you are part of the family. I am so blessed, and I see your spiritual walk, and I just am taken back by that. So she heard that. So I'm passing that on to my grandchildren. My wife and I were intentional in with 18 grandchildren. We take each grandchild out to dinner around their birthday one-on-one. And even though I can speak to them outside of that, it's a time where we speak into their lives and tell them how much we're proud of them. And like tomorrow night, we're taking our 22-year-old grandson out for his birthday dinner. And he is going to hear from me and my wife and hear from us how proud we are of him, because we really are. We're not just, showcasing something that isn't true. We're very proud of them. So we're intentional in that aspect of it. Wish I was better at it with all the kids and grandkids, but we try.
That's good.
Okay, thank you for that. Wow. That's great encouragement and an inspiration to me as a grandfather to 7 young ones. And so I thank you for that, brother. Appreciate that. Scott,
Hey,
Rock,
I would just,
Bobby Bell, come on.
many of you probably know that right now I'm going through the ups and downs of fatherhood with my dad and all that. But the one thing that I would encourage everybody to do is to come back. Come back to this meeting, this setting, because, I was up until about 2:00, and Bob McGann and I were talking late last night. Just had some good fellowship. The power of hearing other men's story and stories helps men get through it. And so I've probably heard 10 stories today alone that will help me finish strong with my dad, with my son, who helped me last night do a job that he didn't want to help me do, but he did. And I got to say to him, Grayson, you did a great job. You did great. I mean, it was a miserable job. It was all this, that, and the other. But I got to speak into his life. And part of that power has come from this group each and every time I come on. And just as you said, I think, Greg, at the beginning, we didn't know who was going to be here, but you guys showed up and blah, 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 blah. Every time you show up, you get a token. And if that token sticks, man, it will help you make your life that much better. And I think it was Jay who said, there's no excuse. We've got no excuse for not doing this thing right. It doesn't matter how our dads treat us. It doesn't matter how our granddad treats us. It doesn't matter how the neighbor treats us. We know what's right, and we have the ability to go to the Bible and find a way to make it right. And I'm so proud of you guys on the call that can correct me and keep me straight and put my rudder back in the water and say, hey, you need to go this way, buddy, and encourage me and tell me what's right and tell me, don't be an idiot, all these different things. Because every now and then you need a slap in the face and say, hey, get back in the fight. Get back in there. And so that's why I come to this group. And that's why I listen to each and every man on this call, is because I need the guidance. I need the correction. I need all that so that I can finish strong. And so I would encourage you, one, I play this message again. I know we can get it on the Zoom call, not on Zoom, but YouTube. We can get it there. But this is a message that I heard. I remember when Bob McGann and I did our first Bible study, and it was Robert Lewis talking about the father wound. And I remember sitting in there, and I think I was the only one who didn't really have a father wound. But now I have a father wound, and I'm sitting there, I kind of chuckle at how things go full circle. But it's amazing on how much we can learn if we just get together as men and share stories and messages and what we know about the scripture and what we know about God and the love of God, etc. So keep it up. Thanks for the support. Thanks for the encouragement, all that stuff.
Amen. Thank you, Bobby. Scott, we'll see you back in.
Sure. I've been blessed as the boys, particularly this last year with Josh, he's the last one in the home. But I've been very intentional. He and I leave about the same time as he goes to school, and he's an early morning riser anyway. But I've been very intentional to pray with him before he leaves for the day. The power of that, specifically, just whatever may be coming his way that day. If he's got a test that's coming up, whatever it might be, I've been very intentional about praying over him. And so it's just the power of that, I think, is so important to be doing as a dad. Being, again, that's intentionality. It's keeping your mind on him, and I think for me it's a process. That's what God is taking our eyes off ourselves as we become more and more like Christ. Okay, we become less selfish and become more selfless. And in parenting, that's the same way. It's when we come home, being prepared to engage in conversation about his day. Lori's been really good at helping me make sure that's the case. So anyway, just a couple things is praying with him, and then obviously be very intentional about asking questions about his day, affirming him with words. I think that's so important all the time.
Scott, that is phenomenal. And the ripple effect of that, brother, you probably won't know until the other side of eternity. But it will have an impact generationally because of how you're doing things. So, man, thank you for that incredible encouragement. Great encouragement. I mean, one of the things that Rod shared, and I don't know how many times I've read that passage, but to hear it again, the Second Chronicles part, where starting with Uzziah, I mean, that the significance, even, men, of partial obedience to God rather than being all in. We talk about that so much at our church with our men and with just everybody. I mean, that's God's call for us, to be all in, not partially. And we can see the results of that, and they are not pretty. So allow those testimonies from Scripture to be a great inspiration and encouragement to each of us, guys, especially on this subject as fathers and as husbands, because that plays a huge part of this this role as men. Man, let's not be halfway Christians. I don't believe in that, man. Let's not be partial. Let's be all in men. So Thank you for that.
Greg, when I think about that story, and again, I'm just reiterating what you just shared, but history does repeat itself. If you want to know what God's going to do in the future, just look back at the past. And if Uzziah would have realized my partial obedience is going to result in my great grandchildren being sacrificed to a foreign god, he might have said, I don't think I ought to do it this way.
Right.
But that was the ripple effect of his disobedience, was a detestable practice that his grandson did to his own grandchildren, great grandchildren. I mean, it just makes me sick. And I just go, you know what? That's where, Jay, you said it really well. We get the chance to break the generational sin. If that's part of your lineage, guess what? You can be the chain breaker. Yeah. And if you didn't grow up with a bad one, keep the good stuff going, keep the good stuff flowing. And I'll just tip my hat to my dad real quickly. And one of the things that is neat in the midst of even the father wound, guess what? My dad has done the best he could, and we've seen a blessing on our family that is undeniable that God's hand's been on our family. And you know what I trace it back to? I have a great granddad in the 1850s that loved Jesus. I have his written testimony, and the prayers of that. His name is Daniel Handley. He was a stud, and guess what? Daniel Handley is still seeing the effects of some really good things happening. So my dad did not break the chain. My dad continued the chain. So it's good, guys. It's good stuff.
Very good. Byron, I see you unmuted. You got something before we go?
Well, something just came to my mind. I can't remember who told me this, and you guys have probably heard it a million times. You can't stand still because the world's turning. And if you're not going forward, you're going to be going backwards. And that was one of the things that I used to tell my kids when they were little, that if you think you can rest where you are, you're completely confused, because you're falling behind if you're not moving forward. And we have an enemy who makes sure that happens to us. If we try to rest on our laurels and say, okay, I've got a good relationship with God, a good relationship with my family, you are sorely mistaken, because he will do everything he can, and he's very wise, very sneaky, and pulls no punches. He will make sure that you fall if you think you can stand still. So that's a little more motivation for me to keep moving, because if I don't keep moving, I can't motivate my kids to keep moving.
Good word.
Amen.
All right. Well, as I look at my clock, we're nearing 8 o'clock, which that came fast. So, Rod, unless you've got something else you wanted to do or to say,
it's good.
I think we'll end it here. And guys, thank you. Some of you we'll see tomorrow, maybe. Others of you, let's continue to press in to him, press into another man or two or three, and keep pressing on for his glory and for our joy.
Yeah.
Right.
And guys, do answer those 3 questions today. Do some hard work. Look at your past, look at your present, look at your future, and what that's going to look like. And it'll be well worth it if you know the answers to those 3 questions that I posed there at the bottom of page 1. Those are critical questions. And then also I've got 3 great discussion questions. Get another guy and process those 3 things. Obviously, by the number of guys that have stayed on the line today, some things are stirring in you, and don't go silent. Connect with somebody. Pull your wife aside, pull your small group aside, answer those questions. I think you'll really be encouraged by what you find out through that. So,
all right. Thank you, guys. We'll see you later.